If you have the courage to hear the full nightmare, stay till the end. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to uncover more terrifying stories like this. The apartment building had been empty for years, yet on that stormy night, Michael found himself drawn to the old, crumbling structure at the edge of the city. The rain hit the cracked windows in rhythmic bursts, like an ominous heartbeat echoing through the hallways. He had no memory of why he came here, only a single, terrifying urge to go inside. As he pushed open the rusted front door, a strange odor hit him, like wet ash mixed with something far worse, something that smelled almost alive. The air inside was thick and heavy, pressing down on his chest. The floorboards creaked beneath him as he stepped forward, each sound amplified by the oppressive silence around him. Lightning flashed outside, briefly illuminating a long, narrow corridor. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally along the walls, bending into shapes that weren't human, shapes that watched him silently. Michael's stomach turned. He knew instinctively he shouldn't be here, but his legs moved on their own, carrying him deeper into the building. Then he heard it, a whisper, barely audible, like the faint scratch of nails on metal, yet somehow unmistakable. Michael, his name, spoken with a voice that was not his own, yet horrifyingly familiar. He froze. The sound seemed to come from every corner of the corridor at once, wrapping around him, squeezing his mind. A door at the far end of the hallway shook violently, as if something on the other side was trying to escape. The wood splintered, revealing only darkness beyond. Michael's breath quickened. His instincts screamed at him to run, yet the curiosity, or maybe the madness, pulled him closer. He reached the door and pressed his hand against the cold, rotting wood. It felt wet. The texture was wrong, like it was pulsing beneath his fingers. The whisper came again, closer now, right behind him. "Don't leave, don't leave." He spun around. Nothing. Just the long, narrow hallway stretching into darkness, and the faint flicker of lightning through shattered windows. A low groaning began, echoing from somewhere above, or maybe below. The building seemed to breathe, walls moving subtly as if trying to contain him. He stepped forward, and a faint outline of a figure appeared in the hallway ahead. Tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. Its eyes were empty voids that seemed to suck the light from the storm outside. Michael froze, realizing too late that the building itself was alive. The shadows began to crawl along the floor toward him, moving with a purpose that was not his own. Panic rose in his chest, but when he tried to scream, nothing came out. His voice was swallowed by the walls, leaving only the wet, pulsing sound of something breathing beneath the floor. The last thing he saw before the darkness consumed him completely was the figure taking a step toward him, its long fingers reaching. Michael would never see the hallway again, but the building was just beginning its game that Michael's eyes snapped open. The hallway was gone, replaced by a spiraling staircase that seemed to descend forever. His legs moved without asking, carrying him step by step into deeper darkness. Every time he thought he could see the bottom, the stairs stretched further, twisting into impossible angles, as if gravity itself had been rewritten. The walls pulsed again, this time with faint red veins like exposed arteries, throbbing in sync with his heartbeat. A cold wind whipped up the stairs, carrying distant screams that seemed eerily human yet horribly distorted, like laughter warped into terror. Michael's hand slid along the railing, which squirmed beneath his grip, alive and slick. A sudden flash of lightning revealed shadowed figures moving along the steps beside him. They mirrored his movements exactly, except their faces were featureless voids, and their limbs twisted unnaturally, as if broken and glued back wrong. Michael stopped. So did they. And then, without warning, the staircase shifted. Steps vanished beneath his feet, replaced by gaps of black nothingness. Michael stumbled, catching the railing that hissed under his fingers. He realized the shadows were no longer beside him. They were above and below, climbing the walls and ceiling, eyes glowing faint red, murmuring in voices layered atop his own thoughts. "We've been waiting. We've always been waiting." The wind shifted again, carrying a sound like thousands of whispers, urgent, chaotic. Something brushed past his leg, a hand, cold and wet, with claws curling into the fabric of his jeans. He jumped back. The shadows reacted instantly, sliding toward him like liquid, closing off every escape. Lightning illuminated the staircase again, showing doors embedded in the walls. Some were splintered open, revealing fleeting images. A child crying in a flooded room, a figure hanging from a ceiling, a mirror reflecting Michael's own face, but twisted, eyes bleeding black, mouth frozen in a scream. He ran toward one of the doors. Inside was a long corridor lined with mirrors. Each reflection showed not him, but dozens of faceless versions of himself, each one moving independently, each one screaming silently. Michael covered his eyes, but the reflections continued, screaming without sound, clawing at the glass from inside the mirrors. A voice suddenly boomed through the staircase, deep and ancient, vibrating through every step. "You belong to us now." The staircase groaned violently, throwing him forward. Michael tumbled down, landing on his knees in a pool of icy water. When he looked up, the staircase had vanished. He was in a black void, water rising rapidly, carrying the distorted shadows with it, swirling them around him in a deadly dance. Michael felt hands grabbing his ankles, pulling him down. Screams erupted around him, his own or theirs, he couldn't tell. And then, a new sound cut through, slow, deliberate footsteps approaching from the darkness. Something huge, unseen, moving with terrifying intent, getting closer with every heartbeat. Michael realized, with a chill that froze his blood, that the void wasn't endless. Something was waiting at the bottom, and it knew him that Michael's knees sank into the icy water. He tried to stand, but the shadows dragged him down, their invisible weight pressing his chest into the liquid. Panic clawed at him, but the void wasn't empty. Something enormous loomed just beyond the faint, pulsating red light that now bled through the darkness. Suddenly, the walls appeared, or maybe they always had been there. They were slick, fleshy, and undulating like giant lungs. Each heartbeat reverberated through the walls, shaking the air, vibrating the water, and amplifying Michael's fear. The whispers returned, faster now, overlapping in dozens of voices. "Move, run, drown, stay." He touched the wall. It was warm, almost welcoming. But then it twitched violently under his hand, sending a shiver of agony up his arm. From the wet folds of the walls, eyes opened. Hundreds of them, small and black, blinking in unison. They stared directly at him, and he felt their gaze pierce his thoughts, dragging memories he didn't remember into the surface. A new sound joined the whispers, a low, gurgling growl, vibrating through the water and walls alike. Something massive shifted in the darkness above him. Something that exhaled slowly, a breath that smelled of decay and rusted iron, shaking the air like a storm. Michael tried to run, but the floor rippled like liquid beneath his feet, throwing him forward, closer to the walls. He reached out, desperate, and the walls reacted. They rippled violently, forming limbs that wrapped around his torso and legs, holding him fast. Eyes opened along these limbs, and Michael realized they weren't just eyes. They were mouths, tiny fanged mouths snapping and whispering his name. "Michael, we've been waiting. Michael, we've been waiting." The gurgling growl escalated into a deafening roar. Something slithered through the water beneath him, a shape too long, too wide, moving with impossible speed. Its skin shimmered black and wet, and when it reared up, Michael glimpsed dozens of human faces fused together along its torso, screaming in agony. He tried to fight back, kicking and punching, but his limbs were entangled in the wall's pulsing folds. The water rose higher, cold and viscous, filling his lungs with fear. He realized it wasn't water. It was something alive, crawling into his nose and mouth, threatening to drown him alive, while keeping him conscious to feel every second of terror. And then, the roar stopped. Silence. The walls retracted slightly, and the creature's shape became clearer in the dim red glow. It was towering, limbs bending in ways that should have been impossible, its faces twisting as though mocking Michael. And then, with deliberate slowness, it stepped closer. Michael could see its final face, his own, but grinning and blood dripping from eyes and mouth. A silent promise that he would join the others. That Michael's lungs burned as he struggled in the viscous, crawling water. The creature, his own twisted reflection, loitered just beyond the wall's reach, its multitude of faces twitching in silent anticipation. Every heartbeat seemed to echo from the walls themselves, as if the building, or whatever this place was, had become a single, living entity. Then, from beneath the water, a new sound emerged. Low, guttural whispers, impossible to locate. They weren't coming from the creature, or the walls, or even the shadows. They came from beneath him, from the floor itself. Michael realized the water wasn't just alive. It was a layer over a network of writhing, hidden things. Fingers, skeletal and pale, shot up, grabbing at his legs, elbows, wrists, hundreds of them, dragging him toward the depths. He kicked, screamed, tried to swim, but the hands were relentless. The water churned violently, forming shapes, faces screaming silently, bodies twisting under the surface. He realized something horrifying. The whispers weren't random. They were speaking his deepest fears, his worst secrets, amplifying them until they became physical pain. You will drown, alone, forever. A flash of lightning illuminated a narrow staircase jutting from the walls, slick with black fluid. Michael's survival instinct screamed at him, climb. He grabbed the first step, but the staircase shifted violently, stretching further into darkness with each handhold, as if testing his resolve. With every step, the whispers grew louder, faster, their rhythm matching the pulsing walls. At the top, the stairs ended abruptly at a door made of something that looked like human skin, veins crawling over the surface. A keyhole appeared in the center, and the whispers intensified. Enter. You know what awaits. Michael's hand trembled as he turned the knob, the skin-like door stretching and snapping beneath his grip. Inside, a narrow hallway appeared, lined with hundreds of identical doors, each with a tiny slit showing darkness that moved unnaturally. Shadows slid past these slits, whispering, "Which one? Which one?" Every door seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, and Michael understood with dawning horror. Each door held a version of him, trapped, screaming silently. As he stepped forward, one door creaked open on its own. A faint, red glow spilled into the hall, revealing a figure hunched inside. Michael froze. The figure was him, but wrong. Its limbs were twisted, head bent backward at a 180-degree angle, eyes burning white into the void. It reached out with impossible speed, claws raking the hallway walls. A sudden slam behind him. Another door closing with a deafening crack. The whispers paused. Then, in a voice that was unmistakably his own, a whisper slithered through the walls. "You are next." Michael turned to flee, but the walls themselves began moving inward, contracting, squeezing the hallway into a narrow tube. Shadows poured from the doors, merging into one massive, crawling mass. Every step forward felt heavier, as if gravity had become a weapon. Panic consumed him entirely. Michael realized the building wasn't just trapping him, it was feeding on his fear. And from below, the whispers promised he would never leave, never even remember the outside world again. Michael stumbled down the narrowing hallway, the walls contracting with every step, forcing him to crouch, then crawl. The whispers beneath the floor had grown into a cacophony of voices, overlapping in a maddening rhythm, each one screaming a different fear he had long tried to bury. "You will never escape. You will never wake." Above him, the ceiling began to ripple, almost like water, and then dozens of eyes blinked open. They weren't human eyes. They were mismatched, some too large, some too small, some with vertical slits, others white as bone. They followed his every move. The sensation was unbearable, as if the eyes could read his memories, twisting them into projections that made him gasp in terror. One eye blinked, and suddenly a shadow detached from it, sliding silently down the wall. The shadow wasn't a person. It was more like a silhouette made of smoke and teeth, with fingers that reached unnaturally long distances. It lunged at him, snapping, and Michael rolled sideways, barely avoiding it. But as he scrambled to his feet, he realized dozens more were emerging, each faster, each more distorted than the last. He tried to run, but the hallway seemed infinite, folding and stretching in ways that defied reality. Every door he passed now moaned and whispered, the doors slit openings forming small, crooked smiles. Within one, he glimpsed a version of himself screaming silently, eyes bleeding black, the reflection reaching out as if begging for help he could not give. The ceiling eyes multiplied, opening and closing rhythmically, releasing a low hum that vibrated through Michael's bones. He staggered, head spinning, and suddenly he felt a presence behind him. A figure emerged from the shadows of the walls, tall, thin, faceless, its limbs bending in impossible angles. In its hand, it carried a mirror, one that reflected not the hallway, but Michael's memories. The reflection began to move independently, showing him moments he thought long forgotten. The time he had abandoned someone in fear, the lie he had told to protect himself, the betrayal that had haunted him for years. Each memory was twisted, grotesque, amplified. He stumbled backward, watching as the figure extended the mirror toward him, the eyes in the ceiling multiplying in unison, pressing him into a corner. A voice echoed from the ceiling, deep, distorted, and unmistakably his own. "You are not who you think you are, you belong to us." The darkness swallowed everything. I couldn't see the creature, but I could feel it pressing against the air around me, heavy and patient. Every heartbeat pounded in my ears, drowning out rational thought. My knife felt like a twig in my trembling hands. I took a cautious step forward, and something cold brushed my shoulder. Not a hand, something slimy, sliding against my skin like liquid black smoke. I shrieked and spun around, knife raised, but still nothing visible. The whispering started again. Not my name this time. "You belong to us." The words slithered along the floorboards, curling into the corners of the room. My double didn't react. He just watched silently, his smile stretched impossibly wide, even in the darkness. Then the lights flickered back, barely enough to see. The staircase was empty. The hallway too. But the living room, my stomach dropped. A small hand rested on the floor. Pale, tiny, impossibly delicate, but wet with dark fluid. It was not humanly small, yet the fingers were perfect. Not moving, but alive somehow. It twitched as if testing the air, like a spider sensing vibrations. I stumbled backward. My double whispered from behind me, his voice chillingly calm. "It's collecting pieces." One by one, a shadow detached itself from the ceiling, limbs bending in ways human anatomy should not allow. It reached toward the hand on the floor, then slowly lifted it, holding it up as if examining it like a trophy. I tried to run, but the back door was gone. Vanished. The walls stretched, warped, like they were made of wet clay. My knife scraped against the warped wood, useless. Then the creature hissed. Not a hiss I'd ever heard, but a sound that clawed at my skull, vibrating through my teeth. It moved faster than possible, slamming its elongated form down the hallway. I pressed myself against the wall, trying not to breathe. The double stepped closer. "You can't hide here." Not from him. Not from what's behind the neighbor's window. The neighbor's window, the one I thought was empty, flickered, a pale face appearing. Not mine. Not the faceless figure. Something older. Hollowed. Watching, waiting. Then it blinked, slow, deliberately, and vanished. Another soft thud came from upstairs. Then another. The creature tilted its head. The wet black limbs curled around my legs. I screamed, falling onto the floor. I kicked and thrashed, but it held me. I could hear bones bending, not breaking, but bending. A sick, wet pop echoed. And then the whisper came again. Multiple voices now, overlapping, chanting my name in unison, echoing off the walls. I realized, stomach turning, hard in my throat. It wasn't just here to kill me. It was here to erase me. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. My double leaned over me, whispering in that perfect mimicry of my own voice. "Once it's done, no one will know you existed. Not even your neighbors." I saw movement in the corner of my eye. Something tiny, pale, flickering between shadows. It was the hand again. And then another. Fingers, hands, piling like toys, all moving toward me. The air thickened. The room tilted. And I knew. I was already too late. The hands kept coming. Tiny, pale, twitching. Each one crawling along the warped floorboards toward me like a tide of ice. My limbs were trapped under the creature's black, wet limbs. Every move I made only seemed to slow me down, as if the floor itself was swallowing my weight. My knife slipped from my fingers, clattering uselessly across the warped wood. The whispering grew deafening. 100 voices, mine among them, overlapping, repeating, dragging me into the darkness. My double knelt beside me, smiling, and whispered, "It's almost finished with you. Just one more part, and then you won't exist." I tried to fight, punching and kicking, but it was pointless. The creature above me screeched, a wet, unearthly sound, and the ceiling groaned as something massive shifted above. Shadows twisted along the walls, lengthening unnaturally, reaching toward me like black liquid. Then, from the neighbor's window, a face appeared. Not mine, not the faceless figure. Something older, hollow, staring, and I realized it wasn't observing me. It was guiding the hands, directing them, orchestrating the horror. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. My double whispered, "Do you see now? You were never supposed to survive this house." He's finishing what should have been done years ago. The hands had reached me. They latched onto my arms, climbing higher with unnatural strength. One coiled around my neck. Another twisted into my torso, dragging at my limbs as if pulling me apart, piece by piece. I felt the wet, cold pressure of the creature's black limbs pressing me to the floor, suffocating me. And then the whispering changed tone. Clear, deliberate. A single voice, familiar, cutting through the cacophony. "Leave nothing behind." My double grinned, leaning closer. Soon, only a trace. Just a part, a warning. From the pit, a presence emerged. It was enormous, far larger than the walls, larger than the hallway itself. Its body was undefined, massive limbs that split and fused like liquid, skin that shimmered black, faces pressed against its form, screaming silently. The creature exhaled, and Michael felt a cold wind rush across his skin, carrying whispers that tore through his mind. "You cannot run. You cannot hide. You will be one." He tried to step back, but the floor beneath him became uneven, shifting like a living trap. The entity rose higher, and Michael noticed its eyes, or eyes that resembled the voids from the ceiling earlier, fixated on him. They weren't just watching. They were pulling, dragging him toward the pit with an invisible force, a gravity born from sheer malice. Desperation gave him speed. He ran along the bone corridor, hearing the floor crack behind him as the entity followed, its enormous form reshaping itself to fit the space, limbs stretching impossibly. Every glance backward revealed new horrors, hands reaching from the walls, faces emerging from the ceiling, shadows writhing in patterns too unnatural to comprehend. Michael reached another door, smaller, carved with jagged runes that seemed to burn faintly red. He threw it open and stepped inside. The room was circular, walls lined with mirrors, each reflecting not him, but the entity itself, infinite versions stretching into eternity. He turned around. The pit was no longer behind him. The entity had already risen, filling the doorway, blocking any chance of escape. A low growl emanated from the mirrors themselves, reverberating through his bones. The reflections began to move independently, stepping out from the glass, merging into monstrous silhouettes that mimicked the entity's form. Michael's mind reeled. He realized with chilling clarity, no matter where he ran, it was already everywhere. The mirrors, the pit, the hallway, they were extensions of the same being, a singular predator with endless reach. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the room. The mirrors shimmered, and for a moment, Michael saw the faces of people he had known, trapped, screaming silently, their eyes pleading. One voice, his own, whispered from the mirrors, join us, forever." The entity descended from the pit, closer with every second, and Michael understood he was no longer running through a building. He was trapped inside a living nightmare, and the entity beneath had claimed him as prey. Michael stumbled backward, pressed against the wall of bone, trying to put any distance between himself and the entity rising from the pit. But reality itself had begun to fracture. The mirrors warped and twisted, reflecting not just the room, but infinite versions of hallways, ceilings, and corridors he had never seen. Shadows crawled along these reflections, merging, multiplying, each one whispering in his voice, his own memories twisted into threats. The floor beneath him cracked, revealing tendrils of black light that writhed like serpents. Each step he took sank him deeper, the room bending with impossible geometry. Walls stretched upward, ceilings fell in, and the pit below seemed to rise to meet him, the entity now larger than the entire space, its limbs fusing into shapes that defied physics. Then the whispers changed, speaking directly into his mind. "You see us. You are us. You will become us." Every mirror reflected not just his face, but multiple versions of him screaming silently. One moved independently, stepping forward, reaching through the glass as if trying to pull him in. Michael's chest heaved with terror. The reflection mimicked his panic perfectly, but it smiled, an unnatural grin stretching impossibly wide. A sudden crash behind him made him spin. The bone walls had split, spilling hundreds of faceless forms into the room, their limbs bending at impossible angles. They rushed him, but as he prepared to fight, the entity's presence expanded, pulling them back, merging them into a single, colossal shape. The creature now filled the mirrors, the pit, the air, and even Michael's mind. Michael tried to scream, but sound no longer existed. Time no longer existed. The room had become a suspended nightmare, every second stretching into infinity. The mirrors reflected versions of the entity he could not comprehend, each more grotesque, more horrifying than the last. The reflections reached out with multiple hands, brushing against his skin, burning and freezing him at the same time. Lightning flashed, or maybe it was his mind fracturing, revealing an endless staircase descending into the abyss, each step lined with screaming faces, shadows, and whispering mouths. Michael realized the entity wasn't just a monster. It was the building, the walls, the mirrors, the water, the shadows, and the floor. It was reality itself, reshaped, fractured, and alive. From the pit came a deep, resonating roar, vibrating through his bones. The entity's voice, impossibly layered, whispered again, "You cannot escape. You do not exist outside. You belong to the fracture." Michael's vision blurred, the room spinning, walls melting into tendrils of black and red, the mirrors shattering into 1,000 screaming fragments. Michael ascended the endless staircase, though it no longer led anywhere real. Each step rattled his bones, each breath filled with the whispers of countless trapped versions of himself. The mirrors from the fractured rooms stretched into infinity, reflecting the entity's infinite forms, each more grotesque, more impossible than the last. The air thickened. Shadows from the walls, the ceilings, the pit below, all surged toward him, merging with the entity. It was no longer a creature, a building, or a corridor. It was everything: time, space, fear itself, alive and aware of his every thought. The staircase bent and twisted beneath him, leading directly into the gaping mouth of the void. Lightning flashed across his mind, revealing every nightmare he had ever repressed, every sin he had hidden, every fear he had buried. They swirled around him, feeding the entity, drawing him closer. The whispers became commands. Look, merge, belong forever. Michael's reflection in the nearest mirror lifted a hand, beckoning. Trembling, he realized he had no choice. Every escape was gone. The floor, the walls, the ceiling, everything pulsed with life, sucking him in. As he stepped forward, his own body split into countless versions, screaming silently, merging with the walls, mirrors, shadows, the very entity itself. Time fractured completely. Michael's mind stretched across infinite horrors, every version of himself experiencing every scream simultaneously. And then, silence, absolute, eternal, infinite. Somewhere, in the endless fracture, a single whisper echoed, barely audible yet undeniable. Another will come, and it will see me. The building waited, patient, alive, hungry. And the nightmare was far from over. If you enjoyed this horror story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell icon for more terrifying stories.